In case you missed the most recent Hearthstone announcement, the next expansion, March of the Lich King, has been revealed. Death Knight is going to be a brand new class added to Hearthstone, and it's just right around the corner. As a special treat for the player base, the developers has decided to add the entire Knights of the Frozen Throne set into standard Hearthstone. And what that means is we have a brand new meta even a month before the next expansion actually comes out. I'm Uncorrupt, and I've got 5 decks to help get you started in this brand new meta. A new meta just in time for a new ladder season. Right off the bat, I want to take a look at Murloc Shaman. Murloc Shaman is actually able to run some of these Knights of the Frozen Throne cards to make it just a little bit better in the form of Ice Fishing. This is going to be a little bit cheaper card draw option than the Gorlock Ravagers that the deck has been running in the past. It's going to make sure that we don't run out of Murlocs to be able to play onto the board, and hopefully going to be able to give us enough fuel to be able to finish off our opponent with a nice little aggro deck. Aggro, an archetype that's maybe been missing from Hearthstone since the introduction of Renathal. Mulligan for this deck is we're going to want to keep definitely our 1-cost cards, and then our 2-drops, you're probably going to want to prioritize something like an Ice Fishing and a Lushwater Scout. Also with this deck, potentially, you can think about keeping Tide Lost Burrower as well as Wildpaw Cavern. You would really only want to keep these cards if you have a way to be able to curve out in the early game. Doing nothing until turn 3 or turn 4 just isn't going to cut it with this deck. We got to hit the board early and start to pressure our opponent. And of course, you always want to keep Clownfish, just because this card is going to allow us to be able to cheat out so much mana on the turn that we play it, or potentially the turn after, depending on what we've got in our hand and the game plan that we want to approach from there. Next up, we've got a new version of Aggro Druid. This version of the deck is going to be making use of taunt synergies in the form of Strong Shell Scavenger. Give your taunt minions +2/+2. So as you look at the deck, you're going to realize there's a lot of taunt minions here, beginning right off the bat with Druid of the Reef, Annoyatron, of course, Encumbered Pack Mule, as well as Razormane Battle Guard. It's going to allow us to be able to cheat out a little bit of mana. And another addition from the Knights of the Frozen Throne set, you're going to see Crypt Lord. At 1 power, it's not all that threatening, but at 6 health, it's likely going to last on the board for a long time, which gives it a better chance to be able to survive until we can buff it with Pride's Fury or Strong Shell Scavenger. Mulligan for this deck, we're going to again want to be able to hit the board early. We would keep Peasant against classes that are not going to be able to remove it. We're going to keep this card on the play always. You could potentially keep it on the coin if your opponent doesn't have a hero power or a predictable way to be able to remove this card from the board. Also likely you would want to keep Razormane Battle Guard, and you could potentially keep Oracle of Elune if you think you're going to be able to curve out. Then of course, we're always going to be keeping our 1-drops Druid of the Reef and Iron Deep Trog. Next deck on the list might actually be the most powerful of the 5 decks that I'm presenting here. Enrage Warrior getting perhaps the card that it needed exactly to be able to put it over the top into a tier 1 deck in the current meta. Animated Berserker, after you play a minion, deal 1 damage to it. This is going to allow us to be able to damage minions that are coming out of our hand so that they can be buffed by an Imbued Axe. Could potentially be really, really strong in this deck. As well as Forge of Souls, this is going to guarantee that we actually draw both Imbued Axes. Being able to draw both axes as early as turn 2 almost guarantees that we'll be able to infuse them before we play them. We'll be able to buff our minions just a little bit more. I've been playing this deck. It's playing really, really well. The deck is definitely strong. For the Mulligan, we're going to want to keep our 1-drops. You're going to want to keep the location. Anima Extractor is going to be a keep. And Forge of Souls also going to be a keep. Injured Tolvir, possibly also a keep. There's so many cards that we could potentially keep with this deck. It's almost impossible to have a bad mulligan. We should be able to hit the board early, start to develop our board, and then be able to buff our board with the Imbued Axe. And what you're going to find is you're going to end up with a huge board, and you're going to be able to kill your opponent really quickly with an early win. Next up, we have the standard version of Big Priest. If you're familiar with Wild, you know Big Priest is a thing there. It can cheat some things out and get some very early wins with some really, really big minions. And now Standard is going to be able to have a version of it as well, thanks to cards that are coming back from the Knights of the Frozen Throne mini set. Ideally with this deck, you could Illuminate into something like a Shadow Essence. So Illuminate potentially turn 2 into a discounted Shadow Essence, be able to summon a 5/5 copy of a random minion in your deck, which could be Stoneborn General, or it could be Neptulon, or it could be Masked Reveler. This deck just really allows us to be able to get lots of big minions out on the board. We're going to get the Death Rattles from the Stoneborn General, which is going to give us the 8/8s with Rush. Of course, Neptulon, a big minion on its own with the 2 extra appendages created because it's a colossal minion. And then we have various ways to be able to bring those minions back. Amulet of the Undying, to be able to get back Stoneborn Generals. We have removal in the deck, and we have ways to be able to find the spells that we want to find with Thrive in the Shadows. Eternal Servitude, discover a friendly minion that died this game and summon it. Again, we're just going to be bringing back Stoneborn Generals, Neptulons, Masked Revelers. It's just a really, really powerful deck that can get out these big minions early in the game and just overwhelm your opponent. Later on in the game, we have Zarella the Devout to be able to resummon all of the Deathrattle minions that have died this game, and of course, upgraded hero power to help close out the game. In the mulligan for this deck, we would want to keep Illuminate. I think you could also keep a Thrive in the Shadows. You could potentially keep the Location. And other than that, you're really just going to be looking to survive in the early game. Against an aggro deck, you might want to keep a Shadow Cloth Needle, potentially a Spirit Lash, until you can get into some of the more powerful things that this deck can do if your draw is not ideal. And deck number 5 on my 5 new deck list to be able to try out in this brand new meta is going to be Deathrattle Druid. This is actually a ramp/alignment deck, which means that it's going to be able to do some really, really powerful things to be able to frustrate our opponent. One note here, Malfurion the Pestilent is in this deck. This hero card is not all that great. What we've seen is that the hero cards that came out in United and Stormwind are significantly more powerful than the hero cards that existed in Knights of the Frozen Throne. One word of caution before I go any farther with this deck. If you're going to play Malfurion the Pestilent, make sure you're being really careful about overwriting the hero power from your Wildheart Guff. Guff's hero power is significantly stronger. Sometimes it's enough to just activate that hero power so that you can continue to grow your mana crystals up to 20. But again, just be careful, think it through before you play this card. Really, the deck comes down to being able to ramp up and play Celestial Alignment, and then you just do the typical Celestial Alignment things. If you can land a Lady Anacondra on the board, and you can be able to ramp and draw cards with things like Nourish, Wild Growth. We, of course, have Wildblood Seedsman as a ramp card in this deck. And eventually, we're going to be able to hit the top end of the deck, which are going to be things like the Jailer, Denathrius, and Raid Boss Onyxia. Typically, you can alignment. You'll be able to keep yourself safe. Potentially, you can infuse the Denathrius with things like Scale of Onyxia, as well as Spreading Plague. And then you're going to be able to, at some point, drop down a Jailer and some other big minion. You're going to be able to guarantee that you're going to be able to win the game on the following turn. That's going to do it for the video. These 5 decks, very, very fun. A little bit different than the decks that we've been playing most recently. This brand new meta is going to shake things up and really keep Hearthstone interesting for the next month as we begin to count down to March of the Lich King expansion that's going to be coming out in early December. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Uncorrupt. Good luck out on the ladder.